Joanne Woodward remained silent for years as everyone gushed about her marriage to Paul Newman, the Hollywood hottie that many women desired and whom she somehow managed to retain. Their romance was portrayed as perfect, almost sacred. Joanne, however, is no longer holding back at 95. The beautiful story everyone believed they knew is shattered by what she ultimately discloses about her life with Newman. From Georgia to the heights of Hollywood. Joanne Woodward was just a southern girl pursuing her aspirations of living in a big metropolis before the world recognized her as Paul Newman's wife. Her name carried weight when she was born in Thomasville, Georgia, on February 27, 1930, as Joanne Gignelia Trimier Woodward. With their roots in ancient Huguenot ancestry, those middle names suggested a girl who would be noticed. However, her destiny was not only determined by her heritage. The spark was ignited by her mother's fascination with the movie industry. Eleanor Woodward was such a movie buff that she named her daughter after Joan Crawford, a member of the Hollywood elite, thereby instilling aspiration in her child's name. Raised by a restless spirit who never stayed in one area for long, Joanne had one sibling, Wade Jr. Before the Woodwards arrived in Marietta, Georgia, she spent her early years in Thomasville, Blakely, and Thomaston. Joanne went to Marietta High School there. There she initially discovered her stage, which she would never truly abandon. She also never lost sight of her origins. She supported Marietta High in the city's Strand Theater, demonstrating her loyalty to her hometown even when celebrity found her. However, her passion for Hollywood did not begin in school. In Atlanta, it all started one electrifying night. Joanne, then 9 years old, was caught up in the commotion of flashing lights and celebrity arrivals at the Gone with the Wind premiere. She sprang into the actors' procession and placed herself on Laurence Olivier's lap without hesitation. The film's iconic starring actress, Vivien Leigh, was his companion at the time. Security would have taken most children away, but Joanne made a lasting impression. She brought that memory back to Olivier decades later when they collaborated on a 1977 television adaptation of Comeback Little Sheba. He gave her a quick glance to make sure he remembered the daring young girl who had taken a seat on his lap. When Joanne's parents divorced, she had to move again, which drastically changed her adolescent years. To Greenville, South Carolina, this time. She received more than just a diploma when she graduated from Greenville High. She gained experience in the Little Theater, where she demonstrated that she was a performer as well as a dreamer. She followed her love to Louisiana State University, where she joined the Chi Omega sorority and majored in drama. Honing her craft before aiming for New York City, the only stage large enough to accommodate her goals. Joanne wasted no time in getting there. She trained under Sanford Meisner at the local playhouse and studied at the Actors Studio, which is where talent was created. She wasn't merely picking up lines. She was molding herself into a performer who would eventually make her mark in Hollywood. She had not yet married Paul Newman. She did not win an Oscar. Or America's favorite couple's picture-perfect half. She was simply Joanne, the southern girl who once defied convention, pursued her goals, and crashed a movie premiere. However, she was never meant to be ordinary. She was only starting to burn the restless fire that had taken her from Greenville to LSU to the streets of New York. Now, determined to carve out a place for herself, the girl who had once seen stars from the outside was entering their universe. Taking over the screen and the stage. Joanne Woodward was no longer the young child who would show up at movie premieres by the time she was in her early 50s. She was actually squeezing her way into the business. She made her television debut in an episode titled Penny on Robert Montgomery Presents in 1952. Although it wasn't particularly noteworthy or shiny, it was a beginning. Before long, she was working hard to get on stage. She kept trying out till she was hired in 1953 and 1954 as an understudy for the William Inga Drama Picnic. This is where fate entered the picture. She met up with Paul Newman backstage. He was still wed to Jacqueline Witt, his first wife, at the time. However, there was no denying the bond between him and Joanne. It was there, behind the curtain of a Broadway production, that the man who would become her great love entered her life. Joanne turned television into a testing ground. She appeared on numerous television programs, including Omnibus, the Ford Television Theater, the Philco Goodyear Television Playhouse, Danger, Goodyear Playhouse, and Tales of Tomorrow. Although she wasn't yet a star, she was on the right track and kept coming up until Hollywood couldn't ignore her. She made her big screen debut in 1955 as a rough orphan in the post-Civil War Western Count 3 and Prey. She gained notoriety for the play, and Fox offered her a long-term deal. She was acting opposite Robert Wagner as a wealthy heiress in the thriller A Kiss Before Dying by 1956, which gave a sense of how captivating she might be on screen. Even though the performance didn't last long, Joanne's passion for the theater and movie never went away. She even sneaked back to Broadway with The Lovers. However, all changed in 1957. In The Three Faces of Eve, Joanne Woodward astounded everyone. Her portrayal of a lady with three distinct personalities, a homemaker, a seductive rebel, and a balanced young woman, was so nuanced and multifaceted that critics found it hard to believe they were seeing the same actor in the same movie. Neither could the Academy. Joanne wore a frock she had sewn herself as she accepted the Oscar for Best Actress. Joanne, her unadulterated ability, and a needle and thread, no fancy dress, no Hollywood flair. She became famous because of such type of underdog situation. She then rose to prominence as Fox's leading woman. Her reputation was solidified by movies like No Down Payment and The Sound and the Fury with Yul Brynner. She co-starred with Anna Magnani and Marlon Brando in Sidney Lumet's film The Fugitive Kind. Although the movie didn't do well at the box office, Joanne's work with Paul Newman was taking center stage. They co-starred in Paris Blues and From the Terrace, which she later acknowledged she adored only because she felt she looked like Lana Turner, demonstrating that their relationship was just as strong off-screen as it was on. Joanne bravely ventured into burlesque for The Stripper in 1963, honing her skills under the tutelage of Gypsy Rose Lee. By the middle of the 1960s, she was enthralling audiences in A Big Hand for the Little Lady and competing with industry titans like Sean Connery in A Fine Madness. However, Newman's production and direction of Rachel, delivered her one of her most passionate performances, portraying a lonely educator on the hunt for affection. Her reputation as more than just Mrs. Newman was cemented when she received another Oscar nomination for the part. By the late 1970s, Joanne's work had expanded throughout all media. She reunited with Laurence Olivier in Come Back, Little Sheba, reminding him again of the time she had jumped into his lap as a toddler, and she co-starred with Burt Reynolds in The End and the Emmy-winning See How She Runs. She demonstrated that she was more than just an actress in 1979 when she directed an episode of Family. She was also capable of managing the operation. She was busy in the 1980s. In 1981 and 1982, she made a comeback to Broadway in Candida, featured with Newman once more in Harry and Son, and made appearances in Crisis at Central High and The Shadow Box. She received another Emmy for her performance in Do You Remember Love, 1985, on television. In addition, she wrote and directed when she wasn't acting. In 1982, she adapted Shirley Jackson's Come Along With Me, and she played Tennessee Williams in The Glass Menagerie. Not only was Joanne accumulating parts, but she was also receiving awards, including an Oscar, several Emmys, and even distinction as a producer of Broadway's Dreamers, which is considered the group theater's legacy. Decade after decade, she was able to prove herself. That neither her marriage, her husband, nor even the Hollywood apparatus defined her. She made her own name for herself. Joanne Woodward distinguished herself in a sea of Hollywood polish by making bold decisions, giving unvarnished performances, and being true throughout her career, which spanned television, theater, and film. She had no desire for glitz. The task was chasing her. And in doing so, she left a lasting impression. However, Joanne's tale was never solely about her job. It was also about the man who had been by her side for half a century. Through the victories and the disappointments. Because she contributed to the creation of one of the most amazing love tales in Hollywood history, in addition to her personal legacy. A collaboration that evolved into a romantic tale. The romance between Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward went beyond a mere Hollywood liaison. It became the benchmark for what a successful marriage and entertainment career could entail. 1958 marked the beginning of their 50-year marriage, which ended in 2008 when Newman passed away. And during those decades, they created a life that blended history, tragedy, family, and passion. Quietly, the relationship began. When they first met, Newman was still married to Jackie Witt and they were performing in the Broadway play Picnic. Joanne didn't fall in love right away. Years later, she talked about how his appearance hadn't immediately won her over, but she did end up likening him to an ice cream drink on a hot day. It was hard to resist something so ideal. Their bond did not become indisputable until they met again on the set of The Long Hot Summer in 1957. Newman and Joanne started a new life together shortly after the dissolution of their first marriage. On January 29, 1958, they were married in Las Vegas, and Joanne immediately became the stepmother to Newman's 3 children from his previous marriage, Stephanie, Susan, and Scott. She and Newman expanded their family by having 3 more daughters: Claire Clee, Melissa, and Eleanor Nell. Far from the bustle of Hollywood, in Westport, Connecticut, their family's existence took shape. Their first child, Nell, was born in April 1959, the same year that Newman was cast in the lead in The Young Philadelphians. Before establishing Newman's own organics in 1993, Nell would subsequently try her hand at acting under the stage name Nell Potts. Melissa was born on the same day as the couple's movie Paris Blues debuted in the United States in 1961. For a family that were cinema enthusiasts, it was a fitting turn of events. Melissa also briefly pursued acting like her parents did. The youngest, Claire Clea, was born in 1965. She was raised with a strong love for horses and went on to compete nationally as an equestrian before committing herself to her father's humanitarian endeavors. Their professional relationship expanded along with their family. At Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1963, people literally made their imprint by pushing their hands and feet into the cement and signed their names next to their prints. Years before Newman received his star in 1994, Joanne had already made history as one of the first people to be honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1958. Their marriage had humor at its heart, not just fame or beauty. Joanne once clarified that although Newman was unquestionably a track, his capacity to make her giggle was what really counted. And that was what kept them going. When asked about fidelity, Newman himself was direct, saying that he had steak at home. Therefore, going out for a hamburger was pointless. Their professions frequently overlapped. One of their best partnerships was Rachel in 1968. As Newman commanded, Joanne gazed. In one of the few instances in which a couple was honored jointly, the husband and wife were nominated for Academy Awards that year. Nell, their daughter, even played a younger version of her mother's character in the film. Joanne received a Golden Globe nomination and the Cannes Best Actress Award for her role in Newman's 1972 film Effective Gamma Rays on Man and the Moon Marigolds, which once again included Nell. But there was sorrow in their story as well. Scott, Newman's oldest son, passed away at the age of 28 in 1978 after unintentionally consuming too much alcohol and drugs. Later, Newman acknowledged that he had persuaded himself that Scott's actions were simply the result of reckless youth and that he had repeatedly knelt down to ask his son for forgiveness. Newman created the Scott Newman Center, which focuses on drug abuse education, in Scott's name. The family was profoundly affected by the tragedy, yet Newman and Joanne continued to give generously. They established the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp in Ashford, Connecticut, in 1988 as a free refuge where kids with life-threatening illnesses might find happiness and camaraderie. Celebrities got together to promote the cause, which became one of Newman's greatest loves. Acting, Newman once clarified, had not absolved him of his civic responsibilities. There was still something he had to return. Their presence together never diminished, even as their filmmaking slowed. In 2005, they worked together on the HBO miniseries Empire Falls for the last time. Both received Emmy, Golden Globe, and SAG nominations, and Newman won every category. For a couple who had spent decades enhancing one another's work, it was a fitting farewell. Their love held firm behind closed doors. Few Hollywood couples ever achieved the milestone of celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary in private, which they did in 2008. Joanne once thought that although beauty is fleeting, having a companion who could make her laugh every day was the best present she could have received. Paul Newman lost his fight against lung cancer that same year. In the presence of his loved ones, he passed away on September 26, 2008, at his Westport farmhouse. He was 83. Newman and Woodward fought against the odds in Hollywood for half a century. Their unwavering partnership, humor, and loyalty served as the foundation for their marriage. They were benefactors, partners, and lovers. Above all, they demonstrated that a true love story could survive in a world based on delusion. Joanne Woodward's life was filled with tragedies. In February, Joanne Woodward turned 95. Quietly tucked away in Connecticut, one of the last great stars of Hollywood's golden age, she celebrated her birthday away from the spotlight. An Oscar winner, the lady who seemed to have it all, Paul Newman's wife, and once the industry darling. Joanne hasn't been in the news for more than 10 years. In 1993, she starred in her final movie, Philadelphia. She last appeared on television in 2005, co-starring with Paul in the film Empire Falls, and she last appeared in public in 2013. Silence ever since. Following Paul's passing in 2008, Joanne took a total back seat. In December 2024, the couple's opulent Manhattan penthouse, which was the site of several parties with friends who were celebrities, went up for sale for almost $10 million. The glitz is gone. Joanne and Paul purchased the family's historic 19th-century home in Westport, Connecticut, to raise their girls away from the insanity of California, and they still reside there. They established a true life there. Paul passed away there as well, and Joanne now lives her last chapter there. However, the weight of a terrible reality rests behind this calm hideaway. Joanne was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 77 in 2007, a few days before Paul received the news that his cancer was terminal. She virtually immediately withdrew from public life. Westport became her haven, her girls became her pillars, and the Hollywood celebrity who everyone believed to have it all gradually disappeared. The final film that Ethan Hawke worked on was a 6-part documentary series on Joanne and Paul. He disclosed the reason behind the family's urgent request. The idea was to make it public while Joanne was still living and could still see it, even after she had Alzheimer's disease for 15 years. The tale of Paul and Joanne wasn't the only topic of the documentary. Giving her something back before time robbed her of everything was the goal. Joanne Woodward's narrative appears to be a dream from the outside. Beauty, fame, accolades, and the affection of one of Hollywood's most sought-after men. However, beneath the glitter, she has experienced heartache, loss, and struggles that most of her followers were unaware of. And the illusion breaks out at that point. Joanne Woodward finally speaks up about Paul Newman at the age of 95. Joanne Woodward remained silent for decades. She sat silently, smiling, courteous, and unflappable as the world gathered around the altar of her marriage to Hollywood's blue-eyed hero, Paul Newman. Theirs was dubbed the century's greatest love story. A golden relationship that is impervious to controversy, heartache, or breakup. However, Joanne is no longer entertaining the fairy tale at the age of 95. Her closest friends and family members, as well as Paul himself through his posthumous biography, have started to reveal a picture of a marriage that was far more chaotic than the legend permitted. Additionally, the story demonstrates that even Hollywood nobility was unable to avoid the pain of betrayal, temptation, sorrow, and regret. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were both understudy for the Broadway production of Picnic when their eyes met for the first time in 1953. Paul was already married and had 3 kids, but he and Joanne were immediately attracted to each other. The attraction was so intense that it led to an affair that ended his first marriage and, years later, laid the groundwork for a partnership that was praised as one of Hollywood's longest-lasting. Jackie Witt, Newman's first wife, had been divorced by 1958 and got married in Las Vegas to Joanne. They would eventually spend 50 years together, raise 3 kids, collaborate on 16 films, and endure hardships that the general public hardly ever saw. They appeared to be flawlessly balanced, loyal, passionate, and untouchable to the outer world. However, things were never so straightforward in the family home. Melissa, their daughter, once said that the marriage was difficult because people held on to a fantasy of her parents that was untrue. It wasn't all sunshine and roses at home. There were extended periods of stress, heated and simmering disputes, and times when the marriage itself seemed on the verge of disintegrating. Melissa acknowledged that their will to persevere through their lowest points was what kept them together. The issues went beyond conflicts between personalities or pressures from the workplace. Despite his charisma and charm, Paul Newman had a lot of baggage. The loss of his only son, Scott, plagued him. She passed away in 1978 from a drug and alcohol overdose at the age of just 28. Guilt became a silent, destructive force in his life as a result of that loss, which never went away. The drinking came next. The couple's closest friends and family remembered Paul's love of whiskey and beer, which frequently descended into full-blown binges. Joanne once drew a hard line in the sand, taking the brunt of drunken absences and late nights. When her husband stumbled home from what appeared to be work, she made it plain that she would not put up with it. Too inebriated to work. She would either leave or he would gather himself. Paul realized she wasn't playing a bluff. Hollywood's demands just made everything more difficult. Both Woodward and Newman were well-known individuals who had to continuously strike a balance between their personal lives and the demands of celebrity. However, Paul struggled with the conflict between being a beloved symbol and a family guy, while Joanne frequently took a back seat to focus on their kids and stability. In his biography, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man, Paul was brutally honest about being persistently followed by women who wanted to be the ones to get Hollywood's most sought-after man. He didn't hide his shortcomings or defend his reputation in it. He acknowledged that even he was astonished by the aspect of him that Joanne had brought to the surface. He said that Joanne had constructed a temporary love nest in their Beverly Hills home during their passionate early years of marriage. Even though his children were just down the hall, they frequently engaged in wild intimacy in a room she called the F Hut, which was equipped with a double bed from a junk store. In one of the most frank admissions ever made by a Hollywood star, Paul said, "We left a trail of lust all over the place." But Joanne wasn't the only one who felt that lust. Here comes Nancy Bacon, a former cocktail waitress who is now a Hollywood socialite who is referred to as Bacon and Legs in the community. She attracted Newman's attention during the height of his success because she was little, sensual, and incredibly charming. According to Bacon herself, the secret of their purported nearly 2-year affair was scarcely a secret at all. Everyone in Hollywood knew. Insiders, directors, and friends. They filled in for him. According to Bacon, Paul was sneaking into Joanne's house and spending night after night in her bed while claiming he was working late. It was exhilarating to her. It was a concoction of drink, desire, and guilt for him. During this time, Newman was already struggling with his drinking issue and frequently drank whiskey and beer to dull his conscience. According to Bacon, she always knew the affair would end, not because their desire waned, but rather because of his remorse. While Newman scolded reporters who dared to question him, the whispers of the infidelity eventually made their way back to Joanne. The betrayal was deeply painful for her. She apparently thought about leaving completely at one time because she was sick of the drinking, the late nights, and now the adultery. Nevertheless, she stayed in spite of everything. Joanne Woodward's life was characterized by her choice to remain. Later on, she acknowledged that it was difficult to be Mrs. Paul Newman. It came with ongoing conflicts, both private and public, as well as happy and bad days, sometimes in equal measure. However, she acknowledged that the positives exceeded the negatives. The similar emotion was expressed by their daughters. Despite being chaotic, convoluted, and occasionally explosive, their parents' marriage survived. They did not leave. They battled, and they battled valiantly. Paul, on the other hand, consistently declared his love for Joanne. He reminded everyone that he already had what he desired at home, even when women flocked to him, and his status as a **** symbol meant that he would always be tempted. But behind closed doors, Joanne bore the scars of being that stake, of being the anchor for a man who sometimes drifted, sometimes drowned, was his famous remark that encapsulated it. Paul appeared to be enthralled with Joanne until the end of his life. Friends talked about how her presence had the ability to completely change his mood and how his face lit up the instant she entered a room. Yes, they had arguments, but they also had a deep love for one another that neither of them could find elsewhere. Despite not being praised as a symbol like her husband, Joanne adjusted to being a symbol's wife. She frequently dismissed Paul's flurry of attention, claiming she didn't feel intimidated. However, those closest to her were aware of the fissures. She had constructed a stronghold of poise and dignity, but beneath it was the fatigue of someone who had been through far more than the world could ever imagine. Joanne no longer has to act the part as she lives quietly in Westport, Connecticut, at the age of 95. She and Paul used to utilize the Manhattan penthouse as their celebrity playground, but it has since been sold. Over 10 years have passed since her last public appearance. The sharp wit and intelligence that once made her a force in Hollywood have been dulled by Alzheimer's. However, Joanne's reality is gradually coming to light through her family, Paul's memoir, and documentaries like The Last Movie Stars, which was directed by Ethan Hawke. It's the end of the fairy tale, substituted by something more potent, terrible, and human. Her daughters tell of a mother who, despite almost reaching her breaking point, was always the rock. A wife who refused to let her husband's troubles consume her, set limits, and demanded respect. A lady who stayed because she was prepared to battle for her marriage, even when it almost broke her, rather than because it was perfect. In his own words, Paul acknowledged his shortcomings, betrayals, and imperfections. He acknowledged, however, that he was in awe of Joanne, the lady who not only became his wife but, in his own words, gave birth to a monster. The fantasy of their ideal marriage may have been demolished, but what has replaced it is something more uncommon and real: the tale of perseverance, heartache, survival, and yes, love. Joanne's legacy is no longer exclusively linked to Paul's as she approaches 95. She is more than just the woman who accompanied the golden boy of Hollywood. She is a lady who has survived the harsh paradoxes of love, an affair, a husband's intoxication, the heartbreaking death of a stepson, and the weariness of bearing a troubled marriage. The tragedy of Joanne Woodward's existence is that, during Paul's lifetime, the public never fully got to see her. The one who took the hits so the fairy tale could shine, she was the silent half of a myth. Her silence, however, screams louder than any script ever could when the truth comes to light. Joanne Woodward is no longer the ideal wife in a golden marriage at the age of 95. She is something much more extraordinary. The woman who went through it all, lived it all, and eventually allowed the truth to seep through. How do you feel about the connection between Woodward and Newman? Please let us know what you think in the comments section below. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. Click on the next video that appears on your screen as well. You'll like it.